Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello, you lovely homeschoolers out there. Thank you for joining us. If you have a chance, head down into the show notes below and click on some links, especially our Gumroad page and our YouTube channel.
Yep, and our website, www.homeschool-together.com, if you are looking for curriculum, secular curriculum.
Some jerk was holding homeschooltogether.com and wanted $2,000 for it.
Right, so we're homeschool-together. That's okay. If you're looking for secular curriculum, if you're not sure if something is completely secular, we are building a resource database there to help everybody find some great curriculum. And it's got some reviews and input from us, so check it out.
Absolutely. So last few podcasts, we have been discussing reading comprehension, a very broad thing that we want to cultivate in our homeschool. We've talked about asking questions, talked about inference and prediction, and today we're going to be talking about narration and discussion. And we've seen a lot of crossovers, but there's some nuance in the differences between these various topics. And these are things that we can all incorporate into our homeschool. But we do need to be aware of the differences. If you are a Charlotte Mason homeschooler like we are, where we use a Charlotte Mason inspired homeschooling, you will know a little bit more about narration, but we'll kind of get into the weeds on that in a few minutes here. But just kind of getting into it is this whole idea. I think the last three podcasts kind of just talk a lot about the act of you engaging with your student around the written word, formulating questions, formulating discussion, formulating thinking that you kind of like drawing out of your student. I really think of it as like kind of like you're trying to pull them in a certain direction and let them learn through discussion, learn through talking, learn through questioning, and really hone that reading comprehension skills and all the very layered skills that come with that, with the memorization, with the analysis and understanding, and hopefully ultimately being able to recreate what is happening or what they think is happening in the written word, which is ultimately our goal with a lot of this, is to be able to have those critical thinking skills that we can apply to whatever we're reading, and then have them go ahead and translate that into some type of written word or some type of communicated word. I see no difference in like a presentation that is different than like an essay on a book.
Right.
It's just different mediums that you're describing that. But basically that act of creating your own thinking around something that has happened. So today we're going to be talking about narration and discussion.
And discussion is the first piece of that, right?
Absolutely.
That you're going to be going ahead and parroting back, with narration, what you heard, and then discussing it. It helps our students process what they've read. The whole idea is to help encourage them to remember, to interpret what they've read, to make connections to what they've read. So we talked about asking questions last week, and I think that's a great way to go, a great way to start. We talked about questions and inference and prediction, and now we're talking about actually just having a full discussion about what we've read. And I think narration is interesting. I don't know how much we did narration in school, but I don't really remember doing it. But I think it was really interesting when we did a lot of research on reading comprehension. This was a subject that kept coming up over and over again, and it's a key part of Build Your Library, which we use. So I was interested to learn more about narration.
Yeah, it's kind of understanding the process. I like that idea of the process. Everything we do around learning with our children is a process. We're trying to formulate some type of thinking. Ariel and I are reading Atomic Habits right now by James
very
Clear.
Good. There will be an episode coming about that.
And he talks a lot about processes and putting processes in place so that you can then lean on those to get through some type of challenge. And in this case, we have these little processes, whether it's asking questions, inference, prediction. Today we're doing narration and discussion, and it's all part of that process, that learning process around reading and understanding. Now, I remember doing a lot of narration. You said you didn't. I did a lot of it on the schoolyard. We didn't do it in the classroom. We were talking about WWE, WWF wrestling.
That wasn't something you read, though.
We were narrating. Well, it was a, written word, visual medium, same type of thing. We did a lot of narration, recall in the process of learning. But in this sense, obviously, I had two wrestling phases. One when I was in second grade, and the next one when I was in ninth grade. And for some reason, like, it caught the bug.
Boys.
I know, the boys, we all sat around just talking about, man, did you see Hulk Hogan lift Yokozuna? That was crazy.
Boys.
Yeah, the things. Anyway, narration, being able to retell what happens.
So the narration really is retelling in your own words. So I guess, you were narrating something arguably stupid, but you were narrating something nonetheless.
Male soap operas, Ariel.
Okay. So you were narrating. So retelling it in your own words, right? This is what Charlotte Mason really popularized. And it's really trying to strengthen comprehension, sequencing, and recall. So this could be oral, right? So you're talking about, you're reciting passages. Not necessarily word for word, although you can, right? There's the copy work that we do in Charlotte Mason is also, all word for word.
Some of the memorization work that we've done as well around the poems,
right?
It falls into this as well,
right? That would be technically narration.
That active recall, training the recall method,
right? Even though it's not necessarily in your own words. So there could be direct recall, whether it's written or verbal, like repeating a poem. That's a good example. Or it can be something where we're just retelling in our own words what happened, like our daughter's 30-minute complete retelling of the first Land of Stories book to you a few weeks back, right? So that would be narration. And that's really a powerful start, but when we want to dig deeper into it, then we need to move from telling about something to really talking about it. So that's where discussion comes in.
Yeah, and I think discussion can cue in a lot of what we had been talking about the last few weeks, where we're having different avenues of questioning, different avenues of information that we're trying to draw out of our student. But in this case, we're doing discussion to kind of like tease out, different perspectives, clarify any confusion. I think a lot of that is really cool, is when you're talking with your student, you do want to clarify that confusion if it happens. And that only comes through discussion, that back and forth, asking questions. We, like the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about like kind of what to ask. And this one is kind of like, okay, this is part of the exchange of the information, clarifying it, making sure you're honing what they're thinking. Kind of the meta, I think this kind of lives just above a lot of the questioning and the inference and prediction. This kind of lives above that, where you're trying to draw out that information and have them communicate. I like thinking about like narration and discussion as, I want to see the quality of the thinking and the quality of the speaking. I know we said that we can have them do this in different ways, whether it's written down or through oral. Obviously, the oral narration discussion is probably the first things we'll end up doing with our youngest. But that's where you really want to have them speaking in full sentences. This is chances to correct grammar or any type of pronunciation of certain words. And then also honing the ideas of what they're thinking, if they're using the words correctly, or if they're kind of like not, or maybe they're not using the right vocabulary from the book. A lot of times you'll see them use certain words and they'll be reticent to actually use the correct word, and they'll use something that's a little bit easier, and you can help spur them to add a little bit more into their vocabulary. You can do a lot into this like kind of meta discussion around, the discussion of these topics as you're asking the questions, as you're asking them to clarify different themes and different things within the reading. You can have them kind of like the quality of the discussion. It can be a big factor in what you're talking about. I do this a lot. I know I've been doing this since they were really young. If I ever hear a grammar mistake, I fix it in line immediately. And then it's kind of like, I goes to the park. I say, and if my daughter says that, like the youngest, I'll immediately jump in and say went. And then she'll re-say it. I went to the park. And it's just ways of just cleaning up the thinking, cleaning up the grammar, cleaning up the vocabulary, in line in order to, make it a better experience.
Right. In the middle of discussing some higher topics.
Exactly.
A lot of times I can hear that happening. You're having a discussion about something and that's when that comes up.
Yeah.
I like a discussion for the ability to process and think out loud. I'm a big think out loud person.
Yeah, sure.
Half the time
I have to ask you, I go, are you talking to me or are you talking to yourself?
Right. You're like, do you want response? And a lot of times I do, but I'm processing it out loud. And I can definitely see that our oldest daughter likes to process out loud. Yeah. She likes to kind of talk it through. And so you might find that some kids our youngest, I think, really processes it in her head. She's more like you. Mm-hmm. So, your mileage may vary with your child, but having a really robust discussion can help you to think of the ideas, maybe through the discussion. As you're talking, you're thinking of new things that you didn't think of at the beginning of the discussion. Mm-hmm. It's really spurring your brain. So if we're going to have a great discussion, the next question is like, how do we as adults and as educators facilitate having that really great conversation? We talked about asking open-ended questions that will mm-hmm. invite our kids to give their opinion or their interpretation of what's going on. What surprised you most? What might you have done in this situation? What do you think that the author wanted us to feel? Mm-hmm. Kind of those like open-ended questions are a great way to start a discussion, but mostly we want to just kind of keep it relaxed. We don't want it to feel like, oh, this is a big test. I'm assessing you all the time. I mean, honestly, we're assessing them all the time, but they don't need to feel like we're assessing them all the time. And if they can like lead, maybe you kick the discussion off with a good open-ended question and then see where it takes you. Mm-hmm. See what they're interested in, what they want to process or what they want to find out about or they're curious about. And sometimes I'm surprised at where our discussions go. A lot of times they leave the book entirely, right? It'll start in the book and then it'll go into all kinds of other things that they've seen or heard or other things they were naturally curious about.
Yeah. I like when you talk about that. It's like getting their memory ready, getting them thinking about outside things, having that space and that confidence to be able to speak. I think sometimes we are so, like we're in the room and we're teaching and I feel sometimes like the girls, they want to just answer the question and then they step back and that's not really what we want.
Yes or no.
Yes or no. Yeah. We don't want to have like the PQ&A, the precision question and answering in our homeschool. Yeah. That was something from the corporate days, PQ&A. But we don't want that to be in our homeschool. We want that to be more discussion. We want it to be more free flowing. You want them to have the freedom to ask you questions and not be afraid to ask questions.
Right. It's a safe space for questions. We're always telling our daughter, right? We've all heard that, there's no such thing as a stupid question, right?
Exactly.
But I'm always telling her, you can ask us anything.
Yeah.
What are you curious about? What are you interested in knowing about? What do you not understand?
Yeah, I think
we'll answer anything for you.
Creating that space to have that discussion, even within a discussion, sometimes it feels like we're asking a question, they answer it. Mm-hmm. Ask another question, they answer it. And sometimes you want to say, ask a question, they talk a little bit, and then ask you something back, and then you talk a little bit, and then maybe having a little bit more free form and getting to that point is difficult because sometimes I feel like the students are afraid to continue the discussion, or maybe they don't.
Interested
or they're not interested. I mean, there's various reasons why maybe the conversation always dies after that first question. And then you got to ask another one and then another one.
And we have sometimes when we have discussion kind of conversations about reading with our kids that they do go on. And other times I would say more often than not, you're right. We ask a question, they answer it. And then we're like, do you have any thoughts? What's one question you have for me? And they're like, I don't have questions. Okay, great. So this is great one-on-one, obviously, but it's even better if we can do it in a group. So if you have several children, you can do that. Involve your partner in that discussion too. Sometimes we have these discussions at dinner. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but when everybody's eating, it seems to be easier to talk about it. Like maybe they don't feel as much put on the spot about it, but over lunch or over dinner, sometimes we'll have these conversations about what we're reading and what we're thinking.
Yeah. And I like that, unless you get grossed out by kids talking with their mouth full.
I have a real problem. I'm like, could you just like cover it or just wait until you swallow and then talk? Because our daughter's like, let me tell you about everything. It's like all the food. I'm like, oh, I just can't. You're grossing me out, kid.
Well, and I like the idea of the group discussion. It's a chance to not only have a good relationship with discussion, narration, questioning relationship with your student, but if you have multiple students, a third grader and a first grader, or you have multiple children, allowing them to ask questions to each other.
Yeah,
and get used to doing that, I think is a really cool thing, doing that kind of group work. And then I think you have here, we've talked about a little bit about the book club that our daughter has been part of. And I think she's more interested in the snacks and the drinks around the book club.
And the social.
And the social aspect.
That's okay.
But
having they are discussing the book, though.
Yeah, having a book club, I think, is a great idea.
It could be fun, to do some role playing if you've got multiple, kids or multiple people in your discussion, and say, like, okay, you're this character now. And what would we ask that character? That's kind of fun. It involves a little bit of improv. So to see how comfortable your student is. Not all students like that. Our daughter, our older daughter's just starting to get into kind of liking the acting aspect a little bit. But I would say a year and a half ago, she would not have wanted to be involved with that at all. So
the performing arts is a huge aspect. I've seen this in some of the literature in my classes. Especially for the early learners in the early years, that kindergarten, first, second, third grade levels, having them role play and act out certain things. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big production, but if they're comfortable doing that, and they're willing to do kind of like characters and talking and voices and things like that, that is something they really promote at the schools in that level, because it not only has them embodying and doing all these things that we want them to do through narration and discussion and questions and, inference and predictions, but then it brings in that prosody aspect where they're like performing for you, and they're putting inflection in their voices, and they're having to like project ideas in real time, having to test their memory, having to test their mental skills, having to embody the characters. They get a little bit more depth in that. The performing arts, and I mean, it doesn't have to be a full production play or anything like that, or you have to dress up or anything like that. But having that as an aspect of your narration and discussion, kind of performing in groups or even just around the kitchen table, is another way for you to kind of have like a little hack where you bring in a lot of these skills around reading comprehension, especially the stories that we might be trying to tell or listen to, and have the children act that out, is another kind of wrinkle that you can bring into your homeschool.
Yeah, and we should not forget other mediums as well, right? They've got we have one of those notebooks that has that half a picture at the top and then the lines to write. Yep. Our youngest is especially into art. I think if we ask her questions about things, she's less likely to really answer those. But if we said, hey, why don't you draw this scene? And then from that drawing, we can have a discussion, because she's very into art. So that's a good way to definitely clue into younger learners. Just like the other podcasts we've talked about, this is about age and making sure that it's adapted for the right age. Your younger kids, it's going to be mostly about oral retellings. You could involve art. You could involve some simple acting kind of aspects if they're up for it. Your middle kids are going to be more about full retellings, looking at the motivations of their characters and trying to think about cause and effect in the story. And then your older kids, your tweens and teens, you're going to be talking about really the overall themes and the things that the author was really trying to get at. What was their purpose, and the symbolism and all of that kind of upper level thinking. So just kind of, you're going to have to adjust for your child's age, and you may adjust not only the type of discussion that you have and the things you're interested in talking about, but also the medium that you discuss it in. I would expect that those older kids should be able to have a robust discussion, should be able to write an analysis of that work. So whereas maybe your middle kids, would not be able to. Well,
and really playing with the delivery mechanism, it doesn't always have to be, a 5-paragraph analytical essay. They can write a screenplay for a scene that didn't happen.
I love
they
that
can have
idea.
a dialogue aspect. They can do art, but maybe make a graphic art for maybe like a middle schooler or an upper elementary. And with those younger kids, they can do pictures.
Do a fan fiction of off of a side character they really like and what happened to them.
Yeah, really explore the medium in which you bring that. We always get locked in. We think you just got to write essays, and that is not what we have to do when we're trying to teach reading. We have to teach the thinking. A lot of times the writing is really, we want them to be able to be good writers, but what is the writing entailing? And that's kind of that thing with the Bloom's taxonomy that we talked about last week, which is that kind of the hierarchy of passage of learning. As you get all the way up to the element of creating, you got to hit all the rungs of that pyramid as you move all the way up to the top. And so is the delivery mechanism at the end, does it have to be an essay? No, it can be a presentation. It can be an art piece that they tell you about. It can be a dialogue. It could be a, some type of acting. And maybe they want to give a monologue or something of that nature, reciting poems that pertain to the thing you're doing, or writing a poem and then, executing it. The end deliverable doesn't always have to be a simple, analytical essay. It doesn't have to be that. Now that we don't want them to know how to do that, but be creative, and even a lot of times ask the student what they want to deliver, because they can give them more of a buy-in. I saw that in the literature as well. Allowing the students choice is a hugely rewarding aspect, because they kind of can dictate what they're doing. And you can give them, one of like 4 or 5 options, and each and every one of those is okay. Do you want to do a presentation? Do you want to write a paper? Some students and kids love to write. Yeah. I've seen a few of them. They just love to write. And okay, well, write an essay. Well, this person doesn't really like to write as much, but they're a chatty Cathy and they love to talk. And
that's our daughter.
And giving a presentation might be a thing, or acting out a scene that they've written. You can do a ton of different ways of delivering the thinking. Don't be so locked into just like 1 or 2 things. Really explore the space, give them a lot of opportunity, and allow them to have that choice is a hugely rewarding thing for the students.
Yeah, and one thing we want to talk about too is naturally in these discussions, you're going to uncover that there's gaps in your students' understanding, or they may like totally get it wrong. You could be asking about the motivation of something, and they're like coming in left field, right? It's like totally not correct. And one of the things about this is that it's a great opportunity for us to model having a, respectful disagreement. Like, oh, I saw that part differently. What made you think that was that way?
That's a good point.
Right, because there's going to be a lot of times, especially like I'm doing this in my MBA constantly. Every week I'm having to respectfully, disagree.
Critique other
people. So this is a great way to just model how we can do that in a way that doesn't make our student feel like they're absolutely wrong. This is a great teaching moment. And it's a great way to, maybe provide some backup evidence. Oh, you saw it as this way. I actually saw it this way. And these are the clues in the writing that made me think that. So you can show them how you're backing it up with some evidence, and then how they can do that. So it's a great opportunity for teaching when students, inevitably, there's going to be some cases when they are completely wrong. Not that anyone's, and I want to be careful about this, not that anyone's feelings about it are wrong. Like, how did this make you feel? Yeah. But when you're talking about, why do you think she was sad? And she's like, your student's got something just not even related to the story. Because we've had that happen before. We're like, no, that's not, no. Clearly she was sad because there's all these things going on. And you're like, I think she had a bad hair day. No, whatever. So, we're not trying to invalidate anybody's
Errol,
feelings.
Did you not see the picture on page 18? She had a bad hair day.
Right. So I think it's great. It's great both when your student's getting something wrong that you can model how to respectfully disagree. It's also great when you and your student don't agree on something that maybe doesn't have a specific right or wrong answer, right? Where they have this passage or this chapter, whatever, gives them a certain feeling. It gives you a different feeling. And it's a great opportunity to dialogue about like why you each felt different ways about what you read. And that's such a healthy thing to teach them. And
the other side of that is not just necessarily helping them when they're wrong, or giving space and teaching them that people can come to 2 different conclusions, and that is okay with things.
Which is great. The
aspect of receiving criticism and then channeling that in a productive way. I think a lot of people struggle with that. That's something I think I do really well with my writing. When I get criticism on my writing, I don't take it very personally. I take it as like, okay, I'm learning. What can I do? There's some wrinkles of truth here. What can I learn from this? And then how can I then take that forward? I think something that people, not that we want to be mean or anything like that, but allowing them to learn how to take criticism is a very challenging thing, and it very often has to be handled in the reverse first, where you are modeling that, where you get the criticism. You show how to do that. You then go ahead and move forward and change your thinking or whatnot. And you can set up scenarios where they can give you criticism in a respectful way. you then internalize that, model that back to your student, and then turn around and maybe give them some critique, and then they can go ahead and model that and know that it's not something that I take personally, that it's okay to be wrong and for somebody to give you corrections. I think that's super powerful, especially when, they get out of, homeschool and they get into the real world where, their work may be critiqued by a manager or an upper level person.
It's critiqued all the time.
All
My
the
work's
time.
always critiqued.
All the time. And you got to really have not just a thick skin, but you got to have, I don't like that idea where we're cultivating a thick skin because it's I'm able to allow the criticism to bounce off me.
Yeah.
We want to absorb the criticism, parse the criticism, do the right changes.
Use it constructively.
And see, how I can change my thinking going forward. Especially if you're doing things like presentations. That's a big one that we always see is is your slide deck, having the standard formatting and all that type of stuff. And some people just don't go along with that. And
they read exclusively from the slides.
Read from the slides. They're just being able to take critique, I think, is kind of the other aspect of that, where you're like, oh, not only are you wrong, but here's some critique on how to fix it, and to be able to do that without having their feelings hurt, I think is a big skill to learn. And I think it's a tough skill for most people to handle, but being able to start to do that, I think, is important.
Yeah, and I think the way that we can continue to have these conversations and we can continue to give feedback and have meaningful discussions is to just make it a habit, right? Mm-hmm. It's part of our routine. Like we always talk about a story at lunchtime, or we're going to recap the chapter in a narration at the end of every chapter that we read to make to see what we think, or we always ask how we feel about it. So you can keep a reading journal if you want to with written kind of discussion questions or things that you want. We talked about ChatGPT last week is something that you could use to help come up with good questions, or was that the week before? I don't remember. But anyway, if you're struggling,
we always be using Chatty.
Yeah, right. If you want to come up with things that you want to ask, you can always keep a reading journal. At the end of each reading session, you could ask, what was the coolest thing we read? What was the biggest moment? Or your biggest question, or whatever.
Open-ended philosophical questions like trolley experiment, lifeboat scenarios, things like that. Like, what would you do, if this happened, and that type of thing. Those are really cool kind of open-ended questions where you can get a lot of discussion, maybe not necessarily pertaining to your reading, but if you see something in your reading that kind of is tangentially related to that, you can go ahead and say, well, in our story, the dog was doing this, Call the Wild, right? Buck was doing this thing. Like, what would happen if you were in the wild and you had to, make a choice between this or that? How would you do that? And those are really cool. I used to have these discussions with our oldest. We had robot discussions. I said, okay, I have an issue. I have a broken leg and I have a broken arm, but I want to have my dishes done and I need chocolate chip cookies. What type of robot can you design for me? She'd be like, okay, I'll take an oven and I'll put legs on the oven and the oven can walk up the stairs and bring you a glass of water. Doing that. Yeah, there are all these thinking experiments and whatnot. And I like those for open-ended discussions that maybe don't feel like, you're learning and you're allowed to have those type of things. And then you can maybe even key that into maybe something that you're reading or a topic that you're discussing, whatever genre of thing that you're going through, ancient civilizations around the world, how would you make, what would you put on as toppings for your, soft pretzel as you're studying Germany or something like that? What would you want to be the ideal thing? Or what would you put in your crepe, if you were in Paris, and that type of thing, have them have fun with those type of thought experiments. And these are another ways to kind of bring in that discussion narration and kind of make it a habit where you're just asking fun questions all the time.
One of the things I like about a great discussion is it's such a connecting moment for you and your kids, right? Every time my daughter and I, either daughter, but especially our oldest, she tends to be a little bit more emotional and sensitive. Every time we have a really great discussion, I feel like we're connecting so well. I'm learning about her and how her emotions are growing and changing and her thoughts are getting more complex. She's learning about me and the opinions that I have. So I think one of the best things about a great discussion is just those bonds that it forms. So hopefully these were some helpful ideas and will help you to, put narration and discussion into your reading. And next week, we're going to continue talking about reading comprehension as we're really completely covering this subject so that we will all know how to help our kids. Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!